The hills of Judea sleep beneath a veil of dust and starlight. Wind moves slowly through the ravines, carrying the scent of wild thyme and the faint rustle of unseen creatures. In that hush between day and night, when the sun's last glow fades into the quiet blue of eternity, they say a boy once walked alone, barefoot, curious, his shadow long and slender across the sand. He did not speak often, but when he did, the wind listened. The stones held their breath. Even the olive trees seemed to lean closer, as if the earth itself longed to understand what this child already knew. There is a wind that never sleeps on the high plateau, a dry, whispering breath that moves through the stones as if the mountain itself remembers. Beneath its restless sigh stands the ruins of an observatory, long forgotten by time. Its dome has crumbled, its walls bear the blackened scars of flame, and in its hollow heart sits a single table, carved from basalt, smooth from the touch of hands long turned to dust. Upon it rests a fragment of parchment, darkened by age and smoke, a map of the heavens, a map they tried to burn. He was not yet the man the world would come to name and divide. He was only a boy, one among shepherds and craftsmen, growing beneath the same sky that watched over prophets and kings. Yet something about him belonged more to silence than to sound. In the courtyards where elders debated the laws of God, he would sit apart, tracing circles in the dust with his finger, eyes half closed, listening not to their words but to the space between them. The desert was his first teacher. Its vastness did not frighten him. It calmed him. Each gust of wind seemed to whisper in a language without letters, a rhythm older than scripture. When the night descended, the stars unfolded like scrolls written in light, and he would look upward until the constellations blurred into one shining field. In that shimmering quiet, he began to sense what others could not. That truth was not a thing to be spoken, but to be felt, like the pulse beneath one's skin, or the warmth of dawn long before the horizon breaks. Villagers saw him wandering the outskirts of Nazareth, along stony paths lined with fig trees and thornbush. He would pause beside old wells, gaze into their darkness and whisper, as though speaking to the reflection that stared back. Some said he spoke to God. Others said he was merely dreaming. Yet those who met his eyes felt something shift, a gentle unsettling, like remembering a song they once knew but had long forgotten. His mother often watched from a distance, her hands still from their work. She noticed how animals followed him, stray dogs, doves, the slow-moving donkeys, as if drawn to a quiet presence beyond human noise. He never commanded them. He simply was, and they understood. Even the children, in their games, would stop when he passed, unsure whether to laugh or bow. There are stories, faint and half-remembered, of this boy venturing into the wilderness beyond the village. For days he would disappear among the rocks and sunlit silence. Shepherds returning from the hills claimed to have seen him standing on a high ridge, arms open to the wind, eyes closed as if in prayer. When asked what he sought, he would only smile, a gesture as soft as a shadow, and say, "The voice that speaks when no one speaks." Some ancient fragments tell of teachers from distant lands, travelers from the east, who passed through Galilee during those years. Men in robes of linen and saffron, carrying scrolls marked with unfamiliar symbols. They spoke of the breath as the bridge between heaven and earth. It is said one of them stopped in Nazareth and met the boy by a well at twilight. No one recorded their words, but when the traveler departed, he was seen weeping quietly, saying, "He already knows." The seasons turned. The boy grew taller, but not heavier, as though the world's weight could not cling to him. He worked with his father's tools, shaping wood into beams and doors, but his gaze remained somewhere beyond the grain. Sometimes, as the hammer fell, he would pause, listening again to something distant, eternal. The elders thought him strange, but harmless. They could not know that centuries later, people would search every scroll, every ruin, every whisper of history, to find traces of those silent years. One night, when the air was cool and the sky endless, he climbed a hill outside the village. From there he could see the valley below, scattered fires, flickering like stars fallen to earth. Above him, The constellations shimmered in their ancient order. Orion's belt, the crown of Cassiopeia, the soft curve of the Milky Way. He lay down upon the earth, his head resting on his arm, and spoke softly to the desert. "What is truth?" he asked. He stayed through one winter. Snow gathered on the stone roofs like folded robes, and icicles hung like organ pipes from the eaves. In the long nights, he copied fragments of their scripture. Not words, but lines shaped like breath, spirals and arcs meant to guide the eye rather than instruct it. They taught him that to read was not to decipher but to dwell, to let meaning ripen slowly like fruit. He came to understand that enlightenment was not an arrival, but the softening of distance. Sometimes, before dawn, he would climb to the highest terrace. From there, the world stretched out beneath him, valleys veiled in mist, rivers shining like molten glass. He would close his eyes and listen. The mountains did not echo. They absorbed sound, as if holding it in trust. He thought of all he had left behind. Cities heavy with law, words sharp with certainty, and realized that silence, too, could be a teacher. When spring returned, he prepared to leave. The monks gathered in the courtyard, their eyes reflecting both sorrow and peace. The elder approached him, placing a small stone in his palm. Smooth, round, etched with a spiral. "The road down is steeper than the climb," he said. "Carry the silence with you, for it will be your true weight." He descended at dawn. Behind him, the bells sang one last time, their sound dissolving into the rising light. At the base of the mountains, he looked back. The monastery was gone, hidden by mist and distance, or perhaps never there at all. Yet the silence followed him, soft, patient, eternal. A voice without words that whispered through every breath he took. Perhaps, he thought, the monastery was not a place, but a remembering. Perhaps dawn itself was the prayer. No one remembers who first spoke of it, the gospel that was never written, only carried by clouds. It was said to drift between mountains and seas, its words invisible but alive, shaped by wind and sunlight. Some believed it was the oldest scripture of all, the breath of creation still echoing across the sky. He first heard of it while resting on the plains near Damascus. Shepherds there spoke of clouds that gathered into strange patterns at dawn. Spirals, arches, forms that looked almost like letters before the light dissolved them. Each morning, the sky writes, they told him. Each evening it erases. He watched for many days. The more he looked, the less he saw. And yet, the more he began to feel that something was being spoken, not to the eyes, but to the heart. When the wind changed, he followed it north. The days lengthened, and the air grew thin and fragrant with pine. He climbed hills where clouds rolled low, brushing the ground like ghostly veils. There, he found a hermit who had lived alone for 30 years. The man's hair was white as frost, his skin darkened by storms. "Do you read the sky?" the traveler asked. The hermit smiled. "I listen to it," he said. "Words fall, clouds rise. Both return to where they began." They sat together through many evenings, saying little. The hermit showed him how to read silence as one reads a text. Slowly, with the eyes of the soul rather than the tongue. At dawn, they watched vapors gather in the valley below, turning pink and gold as the first light struck. There, the hermit whispered, "Today's sermon." The clouds shifted, revealing shapes like open hands, like doves, like eyes half closed in peace. Then, as the sun rose, they dissolved into pure light. The wind answered, not with words, but with the faint sound of movement, sand brushing against stone, a long exhale of the earth itself. It seemed to him that all things breathed together. The stars, the soil, the sleeping animals, even the quiet pulse within his chest. He asked the old man if any had tried to record these signs. The hermit nodded. Many. Some traced the patterns into sand. Others painted them upon stone. But none endured. The clouds will not be captured. They only wish to be remembered. And so the traveler began to remember. Not with ink or parchment, but with breath. He inhaled deeply each morning, exhaling the color of dawn. He began to notice that the clouds carried moods. some thick and sorrowful, some thin and joyful, some so luminous that they seemed to hum. He realized that perhaps this was how the world prayed, not with temples and bells, but through the slow unfolding of vapor and wind. Once, during a long silence, the hermit said, "You will return to the cities. You will speak of this, and they will not believe. But if you can teach them to pause, even for the length of a single breath, they may remember what sky they came from." When the time came to leave, the traveler descended the mountain at twilight. The air shimmered with the last light of day, and far below he saw a river curling like silver thread. He stopped and looked back. Above the peaks, a single cloud burned gold, shaped like a scroll unrolling. He smiled, though he did not understand. Perhaps the gospel of the clouds was never meant to teach, but to remind that truth is not written, but breathed. In the years that followed, he carried the practice into every place he went. In crowded markets, he looked upward. In quiet rooms, he watched the play of light across the wall. When people asked what he sought, he answered gently, "I am reading." They would laugh, not knowing what he meant. But sometimes, when storms gathered and thunder rolled like distant drums, he would close his eyes and whisper, "Speak, and I will listen." He never wrote a single line. Yet those who met him said his presence was like clear air after rain, cool, cleansing, endless. When he died, his disciples found no scrolls, no relics, no words. Only a bowl of rainwater on the windowsill, and in its reflection, a single drifting cloud. Perhaps that was the message. Perhaps the sky itself is still reading us. There was once a city built for a man who never came back. It lay in a valley surrounded by hills the color of ash and honey. No traveler stumbled upon it by chance, for the roads that led there were meant to be forgotten. Yet the city endured, not with noise, but with expectation. Its gates stood open, its fountains ran though no one drank, and its streets were swept each evening as the sun fell behind the hills, gilding the empty doorways with light. They said it was founded by those who had heard him speak in the years of wonder. When he vanished into silence, they carried his memory eastward, beyond the frontiers of empire, and began to build what they called the City of the Promise. They carved its foundations in the likeness of a dream, 12 avenues to match the constellations, 7 towers to mark the virtues, and at its heart, a great courtyard with a seat of white stone facing the sunrise. It was left unoccupied. "He will return to rest here," they whispered. "And when he does, the air will remember how to breathe." Perhaps it was in that moment that his knowing began, not as revelation, but as remembrance. As though some part of him had always belonged to the stillness that existed before words were born. He closed his eyes, and the world became weightless. The sound of the wind faded, the stars blurred, and time itself seemed to fold into silence. Generations passed. The builders died, and their children tended the city as one tends a shrine. They planted myrrh and fig along the walls, so that the scent of fruit and resin would greet him. Each dawn, they lit lamps along the eastern road and waited until the last star faded. No one complained. Waiting itself had become their faith. Centuries turned the marble to dust and the towers to bone. Still, the bells rang each morning, deep and slow, their bronze voices carrying across the fields. A few travelers came and stayed, drawn by rumor of a peace that never aged. They asked the citizens why they waited, and the answer was always the same: because we remember. The traveler from the western deserts came among them one autumn. He found the city quiet, its people gentle and spare in speech. Children played beneath the empty arches. The air was sweet with olives and rain. He asked the oldest among them, a woman whose eyes were the color of smoke, why no one despaired of a return that never came. She smiled faintly. "You misunderstand," she said. "He returns each day the sun rises. We only keep the doors open so that light can enter." That night he walked the streets alone. The lamps burned low, and every window held a small flame as if to guide a guest through dreams. He wandered to the white seat in the courtyard. It was polished smooth by centuries of reverent touch. He sat upon it and felt a strange stillness, not absence but fullness, like the pause before dawn when all things await a single breath. A memory stirred, of his own youth in Nazareth, of laughter, of dust on his sandals. He thought of the countless villages where he had spoken, and the faces that had vanished into time. Had they too built cities of remembrance, invisible but enduring? He bowed his head, and for a moment the courtyard seemed to glow, as though moonlight had taken shape around him. When morning came, the people gathered as they always did. They saw the white seat shining brighter than before, as if warmed from within. But the traveler was gone. Only footprints remained, leading toward the hills. Some said it was the dawn wind that had polished the stone. Others said the light had rested there. The city did not argue. It only prepared for another day of waiting. Through seasons and empires, the city of the promise remained. Neither alive nor dead, simply awake. In times of war, soldiers passed through and found no walls to conquer. In famine, wanderers came and left fed by the silence. Even in ruin, the fountain still murmured under the earth, whispering to the roots of fig trees, "He will return." And perhaps he did. Perhaps he never left. For those who passed through the valley at evening tell of a radiance rising from its stones, of windows glowing where no fire burns. Some swear they hear footsteps on the marble streets, light as the sound of wings. Others hear only wind and their own heartbeat. If you stand there at sunset, when the hills become violet and the first star opens like an eye, you will feel it too. That gentle expectancy that holds the world between breath and prayer. It is not waiting for a man. It is waiting for awakening. Perhaps the city was never built of stone at all. Perhaps it was always built of longing, and longing, too, is a kind of faith. They say the hills remember his voice still, the boy who spoke not to men, but to the spaces between things. The one who listened before the world began to ask. And in the breath between dreams, if you listen closely, you might still hear him. A whisper moving through dust and starlight, telling you that the sacred was never far away. It was always here, waiting, hidden in the quiet heart of the desert, beneath the shifting sands of Alexandria, where the streets hum with merchants and the harbor smells of salt and spice. There sleeps a chamber no one was meant to find. It lies beyond the reach of torchlight, deeper than catacombs, sealed by time and secrecy. Those who first uncovered it told no one. Those who tried to measure it were lost to silence. The story begins with a rumor, an inscription found on a crumbled stele near the ancient necropolis. It spoke of 7 thrones of stone, unoccupied, waiting for the breath of the just. Archaeologists thought it allegory. Mystics thought it warning. Yet one winter, when a storm tore the roof from a forgotten crypt, a narrow stair appeared beneath. The steps descended into air so old it had weight. He came with a single lantern. The flame bent backward as he entered, as if unwilling to disturb the dark. The walls were veined with quartz that caught the light like trapped lightning. He moved slowly, counting his heartbeat. At the base of the stair, the passage opened into a vast circular hall carved from black basalt. Around its perimeter stood 7 chairs, not thrones of gold, but simple blocks, worn smooth by centuries of invisible touch. He approached the nearest one. On its face was etched a spiral, the same symbol he had seen in the mountains of dawn, on the stone given by the monks. The second bore the shape of an eye, the third, a flame, the fourth, a hand extended outward, the fifth, a circle within a circle, the sixth, a drop of water, and the 7th was blank, polished to a mirror. He sensed no royalty here, only remembrance, as if each stone had absorbed the weight of a life once lived. In the center of the chamber stood an altar shaped like an open book. Dust lay thick upon it, yet beneath the dust shimmered letters faint as breath. He brushed them with his sleeve. The script was neither Greek nor Hebrew, but something older, a language of curves and pauses, of silence shaped into form. He could not read it, yet he understood. It spoke of a covenant not of conquest but of continuity, of kings who ruled by stillness rather than decree. They had sat here, it said, once each century, to listen to the world's heartbeat and ensure it had not stopped. He knelt, listening. The silence was immense, layered. The the quiet of centuries, the breath of stone, the hush of unseen watchers. For a moment he thought he heard water, a slow drip echoing far below. Perhaps it was the Nile whispering through buried channels. Or perhaps it was the sound of time itself eroding its cage. He placed his palm upon the seventh seat, the one polished like glass. The stone was warm, as though someone had just risen. In its reflection he saw not himself, but a corridor of faces. Shepherds, scribes, queens, beggars, each fading into the next until they became light. The chamber seemed to breathe with him. When he exhaled, the torches dimmed. When he inhaled, they flared again. He whispered, "Who are you?" And the air replied, "All that has been waiting to be remembered." A gust rose from nowhere, swirling dust into a spiral above the altar. Within the haze, the faint outline of 7 figures appeared, seated where the stones stood. They did not speak, but their stillness pressed upon him like gravity. One lifted a hand, pointing upward. He looked and saw the ceiling had cracked, revealing a narrow shaft through which a sliver of starlight fell. A single silver thread connecting heaven and earth. When he blinked, the vision was gone. The chamber lay empty once more, but the starlight remained, trembling upon the 7th seat. He realized then that the kings were not rulers but guardians, custodians of silence, ensuring that the noise of empires never drowned the voice of eternity. He left the lantern burning and began to climb the stairs. Each step upward felt heavier, as if he carried the silence itself upon his back. At the threshold he turned once more. The flame below flickered and died, yet the chamber glowed faintly, lit from within. He emerged into the night, the sea wind cold and smelling of iron. Alexandria slept, unaware of the kingdom beneath its feet. The desert has no memory, yet it remembers everything. Years later, the stair was buried again by earthquakes and tides. Scholars dismissed the tale as legend, but divers still whisper of strange vibrations in the bay at night, a hum that rises from the seabed when the stars align over the harbor. Some say it is the breath of the 7 kings, keeping the rhythm of the world. Perhaps it is only the tide. Perhaps the silence itself has learned to speak. Before letters were bound and sealed, fishermen read the tide the way scribes read ink. They knew each crescent moon by the taste of the wind, each current by the color of the foam. Along a shore where tamarisk grows in salt-stiffed clumps and the horizon is a silver thread, a man once walked at dawn, leaving footprints that filled with water and vanished. Those who rose early to mend their nets said he spoke to the sea the way one speaks to a sleeping child, softly, as if not to wake the storms. Night bleeds gently from the water at first light. The boats rock like cradles. Ropes creak. Gulls write quick, white syllables across the sky and erase them with their wings. He pauses by a skiff turned upside down, palm on the weathered keel as if feeling a pulse. In that hush before commerce begins, the shore is a sanctuary. Nets lie like folded prayers. The sea keeps its own liturgy, ebb and flow, breath and release. The fishermen greet him without surprise. He knows their names, and the names of their fathers, and the places where sandbars shift after winter storms. A boy brings him a shard of clay found in the shallows. He turns it over, rubs the salt grit away, and a fish appears scratched upon it. A child's mark or an old charm. He smiles and gives it back. For luck? The boy asks. For memory, he answers. Luck forgets. Memory returns. He speaks little, yet something in his silence orders the morning. Men who quarreled over price yesterday tie each other's knots today. A woman who lost a husband to a sudden squall leaves bread on the step of a neighbor more poor than herself. He does not command. He notices. Where there is fray, he fingers the thread until it holds. Where there is a tear, he lays the cloth so light that the rip seems to heal of its own will. When the sun lifts clear of the rim, he walks the margin where the sea meets earth, a shifting frontier that never keeps its treaty. Every wave is a letter, every retreat a line break. He reads the gospel of the sea aloud without words. The lesson of return, the sacrament of relinquishment, the mercy of movement. What leaves, the water says, comes back altered but true. What you hold, the undertow replies, you must learn to let go. There is history here, layered and salt-cured. Phoenician traders once came for purple dye, the Romans for tariffs and grain. Farther south, a city fell and its stones were fed to the surf. Farther north, a fleet forgot its gods and found a storm. He folds such memories into a single gesture. Stooping to lift a tangled net where a crab struggles, setting the creature gently beyond the reach of knives. The men watch and say nothing. Their fathers taught them that piety is a rhythm, not a show. At noon the light grows hard and the sea flattens into hammered metal. He seeks shade beneath a cliff where springs drip through moss. Children gather, drawn by the gift of his attention. He teaches them a game the tide invented. Draw a circle, wait for a wave to enter, then erase the circle with the heel of the hand. What is the point? A girl asks. Practice, he says, for forgiving. There are no paths here, only whispers. Faint lines drawn by wind and erased by dawn. They say that once, long before his name became scripture, a young traveler walked this endless sea of light. His feet sank softly into the sand, and each step became a question. Where does one go when the path itself disappears? In the afternoon, the wind shifts. Swell builds from a distance, a deep breath taken beyond sight. He scans the eastern line and knows by the angle of a single catspaw that a squall will skirt the bay at dusk. The men are already out beyond the shoals. He borrows a boat, a battered thing with one good oar and one cracked, and rows with the unhurried strength of someone who has learned the patience of water. When the first dark sheet of rain sweeps the horizon, he raises his palm, not as a sign to the sky, but to the men who look to shore for guidance. Turn now. Come home. They heed what they cannot hear. Sails pivot, keels bite. The squall breaks where the kelp beds drown the swell. Rain frets the surface like 1,000 fingers playing one instrument. He does not still the weather, he keeps the rhythm with it. When the fleet slides into the harbor at last light, no one cheers. They are too sea-tired for noise. But hands clasp a little longer. Backs straighten. A loaf appears from nowhere and becomes many slices. Night returns like a blessing. Lamps move along the quay. The smell of frying fish lifts from doorways, mingled with anise and smoke. He sits upon the upturned skiff again, listening to the tide gnaw the pilings with old, patient teeth. A man asks him whether the sea loves or devours. Both, he says. Love returns us to ourselves. Devouring returns us to the whole. When the moon rises, a path of light is laid upon the water, narrow at the shore and widening until it seems the world could walk upon it. He stands and steps to the edge where wave fingers sand. He does not perform, he remembers. The fishermen swear later that for a breath or two the sea forgot its own weight and held him. Perhaps it was illusion or moonwork, or the way stillness can make anything seem possible. He smiles at their story and says only, faith is a tide, comes and goes. Stand where it can reach you. Toward midnight the harbor empties of talk. Nets hang to dry like veils. Cats prowl. Somewhere a shutter clicks. Somewhere a mother hums. He cups seawater in both hands and drinks, not for thirst, but for covenant. Salt stings the tongue and steadies the mind. He thinks of the first waters, of spirit moving upon them, of how creation began with a breath over a vast, attentive blue. When he leaves before dawn, the sand is cold and pocked with his last steps until one small wave takes them. The gospel of the sea has no chapters, no index, no seals. It is written in vanishing script and remembered in the body. Perhaps it was never meant to be kept, only practiced. If you go to the shore in the hour before light, listen. The foam is reading you back. Perhaps the sea was never meant to be understood, only accompanied. Its tide's a reminder that all things come and go, and yet nothing is truly lost. Even the smallest ripple remembers the hand that stirred it. The horizon shimmered like water that never was. The boy, older now, but still carrying the silence of childhood, followed the pull of that mirage, as though something unseen was calling from beyond. He passed nomads who spoke in songs instead of words, and they told him of a place where rivers vanish beneath the dunes, where time folds like cloth and men forget the meaning of distance. When night deepens and the horizon fades, listen to the hush between waves. It is not emptiness. It is the breath of the beginning, still whispering your name. At night, he rested beneath a sky that looked close enough to touch. The stars hung low, trembling above him like lamps suspended from an invisible ceiling. He watched them until sleep came, and in that drifting state between dream and waking, he saw a figure robed in white sand, standing beside a river made of light. The figure said nothing. It only lifted a hand, pointing east, toward lands beyond memory. When morning came, he began to walk again. Days blurred into silence, and silence became his companion. His thirst grew, but so did his understanding. Every grain of sand beneath his feet seemed to whisper an old truth, that the journey itself was the teaching, and that the destination would never reveal what the road already knew. He came upon ruins half swallowed by dunes, pillars leaning like weary pilgrims, carved with words the wind had forgotten how to pronounce. There he met an old wanderer, his beard the color of dust, his eyes reflecting the sky. The man asked him, "Why do you walk so far, when the world is everywhere?" The boy smiled faintly. "Because the world is within," he said. The old man nodded, as if remembering something. He gave him a vessel of clay, filled not with water but with sand, and said, "Drink when you no longer need to." Then he vanished into the horizon. For 40 nights the traveler crossed the breadth of the earth. He reached lands where the tongue was soft and round, where people prayed not with words, but with gestures of the heart. In their temples, carved from stone and sunlight, he listened as monks spoke of oneness, the idea that the divine is not above, but within every living thing. Their chants rose like mist, and in their rhythm, he recognized something familiar, the quiet cadence of his own breath. One evening, as the sun bled into the dunes, he looked back at the road he had crossed. No footsteps remained. The desert had already reclaimed them. Yet something within him felt full, as though he carried every step inside. Perhaps he found what he was seeking, or perhaps the desert gave him nothing at all. But those who later met him said there was a stillness in his eyes, not the stillness of exhaustion, but of knowing, as if he had walked through the silence of the world and returned with the echo of its heart. When the stars rose once more, he whispered a prayer that was not a prayer, only a breath returned to the wind. May the path remain endless, and the seeker never arrive. And so, under the eternal gaze of the night sky, the road continued, vanishing, reappearing, and vanishing again, just as the divine often does, hidden beyond the river of sand. Beyond the last goat path and the last painted milestone of the incense road, where Nabatean caravans once slipped like shadows between rose-colored cliffs, the land opens into a plain so quiet that even the wind seems veiled in prayer. There, travelers speak of a structure without a name. No lintel carved with kings, no garrison, no tithe box. Only a low enclosure of pale stone, sun-softened and unadorned, and at its heart a chamber as cool as a well at dawn. He came at evening, when the Judean sky turns the color of old copper and the sand remembers the day's heat like a sleeping animal. Dust clung to his sandals, and the hem of his robe carried the scent of cedar and smoke from roadside fires. He stepped beneath a lintel hardly taller than his brow, and the world narrowed to breath and echo. There were no priests to instruct him, no tablets, no cords of incense. Just the slow hush of age settling back upon itself. A hush that seemed to hold every story it had ever heard and refused to speak first. 2 mirrors faced one another across the chamber. Not glass. The ancients of this land polished bronze to a star-marked sheen, and sometimes silver when a patron's purse was generous. Twin discs, round as moons, hung from chains the color of dusk. When torchlight moved, the mirrors drank it and returned it as a gentle tide, wave answering wave between 2 shores that could not touch. He stood in the middle where the 2 lights braided. At first he saw only what any wanderer sees, a figure thin from road and hunger, a face browned by sun, the quiet fatigue of a man who has walked farther than his words can follow. Then the reflections loosened, as if the metal remembered every face that had ever hung above it and could not keep from telling. A child passed through, laughing without sound. An old woman whose hands trembled like leaves in autumn. A shepherd, a midwife, a magistrate counting taxes by lamplight. One by one, the human river slid across the shining and was gone, each eye catching his for a heartbeat, each gaze returning something he thought was his alone. The chamber breathed. The bronze sang in a note so soft it felt like the memory of music. He understood with no language that the mirrors were not windows but wells, and that what they drew up was not image but belonging. To see oneself within the great spiral of breath that binds stranger to stranger, widow to king, sower to judge. A knowledge older than the book and younger than the last child born in the next village. A knowledge that insists we have always been one body learning itself by touch and hunger and kindness. One lamp lit from another until the desert is a field of stars. Outside, the caravan bells kept their oceanic rhythm. Somewhere a camel coughed, somewhere a waterskin creaked, and sand ticked against the threshold like rain on a roof. He thought of the scrolls he had seen in temple courts, letters tight as seeds braced for weather, and of the caves at the salt sea where whisperers said other books slept, too dangerous or too tender for the market square. Words keep and words divide. But this keeping was different. It drew together what law cannot bind and what argument cannot break. A quiet rope twisted from mercy and breath. He raised a hand and the mirrors multiplied it into 100 open palms, not in command but in offering. He lowered his eyes, and in the downward gaze 1,000 faces bowed with him, fishermen and brides and tax collectors with their ledgers half closed, soldiers who would one day feel their armor grow heavy and wish to lay it down. No voice addressed him, no fire wrote upon the wall. Yet meaning arrived like daybreak, slow and inevitable, finding every stone in turn. At last he stepped backward, as one leaving a sleeping child. The threshold felt new beneath his feet, though the stone was ancient and crumbled at the corners. Night gathered along the horizon in a single dark thread, and the first star blinked awake above the wastes toward Gaza. He did not seal the chamber or mark it on any map. A place such as this asks to be found by need, not by directions. Some say the temple sank under sand the year the Roman road was laid, its roof broken by the quiet pressure of centuries. Some say the discs were taken to a market by men who saw only silver, and that their new owners never managed to polish out the faint tremor in their surfaces where strangers still meet. Others insist the temple travels, appearing wherever two lives cross and choose to recognize each other. A doorway without hinges that opens in the very middle of the day and is mistaken for kindness. He walked until the ground rose into hills and the hills softened into the shoulders of night. Behind him, the plain was empty, yet his shadow was not alone. It carried with it the dim procession of all he had seen, the child, the widow, the magistrate, the soldier, a company bound by breath. He did not hurry. He did not speak. The lesson of the twin mirrors is too simple for haste and too large for speech. Perhaps the temple was nothing but the world learning to look at itself. Perhaps its stones were only the desert collected into a circle, so that we might notice what has always been true. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And some sanctuaries are not places at all, but moments, brief and merciful, when the light inside us turns and recognizes its twin. At the edge of a terraced hill where stone walls hold back the earth like careful hands, there stands an olive tree older than memory. Its trunk is a helix of light and shadow, bark twisted into knots that look like closed eyes in prayer. In spring, small white blossoms tremble like distant stars. In summer, the silver leaves turn their pale undersides to the wind as if showing a secret. They say that long ago, when Rome still weighed the valleys with its sandals and taxes, a disciple came here at dusk carrying a bundle wrapped in linen. He did not look behind him. He listened to the evening as if each sound were a word from a book that could not be copied. He had watched the years after the crucifixion grow heavy with argument. In house churches and market courts, voices rose and divided like branches from the same trunk. Some wanted a kingdom soon and visible. Some wanted only the inner kingdom that breathes and does not shout. In Caesarea and Antioch the letters multiplied, careful as accounts. In caves near the salt sea, other writings waited in jars, texts not yet blessed to meet the sunlight. The disciple feared that certain words, so soft, so human, would be lost beneath the louder ones. And so he walked to the hill. Under the tree the ground was cool. He cleared a space among the roots, whose coils were as old as the Proverbs. The linen parcel lay on his lap a long time before he opened it. Inside were sheets of scraped skin, vellum pale as the inside of the moon, stitched with sinew, edged by the faint salt of a long journey. The letters were not the square forms of the scribe's school. They leaned slightly, like reeds in light wind. Between the lines he had left room for breath. He had written as he remembered. Not the crowds, not the thunder, but the afternoons, the laughter, the unrecorded kindnesses, the way the teacher listened to a widow as if she were the whole city. He read again the passage he loved most. It told how the teacher once drew a circle in dust and said nothing until the dust answered. It told how the holy can be revealed by folding a shawl for a stranger, by pausing before anger has fully woken. It told how knowledge without tenderness dries up like an abandoned cistern. No wonders stood there, only the wonder of ordinary light. He knew such pages would never enter the canon that would one day be gathered with seals and councils. They were too simple, too merciful, too near. He folded the vellum and gave it to the earth. Between two roots, he placed a jar of clay and a prayer of breath. The jar was not marked. No map noted the tree. Only the hillside knew, and the hillside tells only to those who arrive empty. Years turned like millstones. Soldiers came and went. The city fell, the city rose. In Galilee the olives continued their slow harvest of light. Shepherds sheltered under the old tree during rain. Children climbed its lower arms and whispered into its hollows. A woman mourning a stillborn child pressed her forehead to the bark and slept. It is said that the tree grew wider over the jar, as if to keep the parchment beneath its ribs. The sap spoke the language that paper understands. Patience. Centuries later, a boy with ink-stained fingers, apprenticed to a scribe who copied psalms for travelers, rested in the tree's shade at noon. He felt the ground warm with stored sunlight. His heel touched a ring of stone. Digging idly with a stick, he found the rim of something fragile. Clay thin as an eggshell. He called no one. He did not fully know why. Perhaps because the air had changed, like a room where someone is sleeping. He cleared the soil with his hands, brushed away the last crumbs with the hem of his tunic, and lifted the jar. The stopper crumbled. Inside lay the vellum, browned by breath and time. Edges curled like leaves saved too long in a book. He unfolded a page. The letters rose faint but legible, the ink the color of dried figs. His teacher had warned him that many writings wander the world wearing holy names. But the boy read, and the reading felt like returning. The words did not shout. They did not accuse. They opened like a palm. If you know the door, one line murmured. Enter as if the house were yours. Another said, do not disdain small lamps. They are the stars of a room. Another, let your mercy be heavier than your certainty. He hid the pages under his tunic and walked slowly, as if carrying water. For days he copied in secret, not to sell, not to argue, but to keep a light alive that no decree could forbid. Some copies vanished in rain, some in fire, some in the ordinary forgetfulness of families. But some lingered, in a basket behind a weaver's loom, beneath a widow's mattress, within a prayer book's leather cover. A few lines slipped into Proverbs, losing their names, gaining a home. As for the original, the boy returned it to the jar and set it again among the roots. He felt he had stolen and yet returned everything. The tree accepted both acts without comment. Its leaves moved as if a small wind were passing through the letters themselves. Pilgrims still visit that hillside. None agree about which tree is the tree. Some kneel at one trunk, some at another. Sometimes, after long heat, a breeze crosses the terraces and the leaves flash their silver undersides all at once, like pages turning. In that pale ripple a listener may hear, not doctrine, but a voice remembering. Perhaps the scroll never meant to be found. Perhaps it wished only to seed the world with a few quiet phrases that would hide in common speech until need called them back. If you go there at evening, take nothing you cannot set down. Sit with your back against the bark. Listen for bees in the flowers, for the click of a lizard in the wall, for the far bell of a flock winding home. Place your palm on the soil between the roots. You may feel a coolness rise, the memory of vellum, the breath of the one who wrote, the breath of the one who read. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some books are not lost. They are guarding the hour. And if you hear a line you cannot forget, keep it, but keep it gently. The world has always been a library buried in living wood. At the rim of the world, where the sky ripens into gold before the sun itself is born, there stands a monastery few maps recall. Its stones are pale as bone, its roofs black with centuries of prayer smoke. From afar, it seems to float among the clouds, an island of silence adrift in the breath of heaven. They say the first monks built it not to reach God, but to remember him, for memory, they believed, was another form of worship. He came to them from the west, a wanderer wrapped in dust, carrying neither parchment nor coin. His sandals were frayed, his robe bleached by distance. When he reached the foot of the mountains, the air thinned, and the earth seemed to hum beneath each step. It was said that those who climbed too quickly went mad from the purity of the wind, as though the spirit within the air was too vast for mortal lungs. So he moved slowly, letting his breath find the rhythm of the ascent. The path wound through ridges of stone that glittered like frozen tears. From the cliffs hung bells of bronze, left by pilgrims who had not returned. Their tones drifted through the valleys like voices caught between worlds. As he climbed higher, the sky deepened into violet, and the stars lingered long after dawn. For in that place, day and night intermingled, as if the sun itself bowed in reverence before crossing the mountain's edge. When he reached the monastery gates, no one spoke. The doors opened as though moved by memory alone. Within, the air was cool and perfumed with cedar oil. Monks moved through corridors carved from living rock, their robes whispering like soft wind through reeds. None asked his name. Instead, they offered him a bowl of water, and he drank until the reflection in the bowl no longer trembled. At sunrise, the bells tolled, not in summons but in gratitude. The sound was low and wide, like the world exhaling. He learned that here speech was rare. The monks believed that language, if used carelessly, could bruise the soul. They practiced the prayer of breath, a rhythm of inhaling and releasing until the distinction between self and silence disappeared. He watched them at dawn, kneeling on terraces of stone, faces turned toward the eastern fire. It was not worship as he had known it. It was remembering the first light that ever was. In the refectory, meals were taken in stillness. A single lamp burned at the center of the room, its flame steady, neither wavering nor strong. Bread was passed from hand to hand, and when it reached him, he hesitated, the crust warm, the weight simple, sacred. He broke it, and in that moment he felt the same stillness he had known as a child beneath desert stars. One monk, the oldest among them, looked at him and smiled. His beard was white as salt, his eyes blue with clarity. "You have carried the noise of the world a long way," the old one said. "Here you may lay it down."